Get the recording going, and I'm going to turn this over to today's moderator, Kathy Marcus. Kathy?
Thank you very much, Lisa. And thanks everyone for being here today. I think it's almost inevitable that at some point every organization that you're part of is going to have a session on what has the pandemic meant to us, what have we learned, what have we survived, how have we pulled it all together. And we really wanted to have a session like that for CoSA, just to talk about how state organizations, state archives are coping with the pandemic, maybe getting ahead of the game in some cases. It's been a time of a lot of, dire and difficult times, but also a time of real creativity for a lot of people, sort of along the lines of, necessity being the mother of invention. But we were there and we made the most of it. Today, we're going to be hearing from actually 4 speakers, although 2 of them are going to speak together. And they represent a state university and staff from 2 different state archives. And I've kind of made the decision to introduce them as we go along, just because, especially at SAA, I feel like I'm constantly walking in at the last minute and thereby missing all of the introductions for everybody. So we will introduce our speakers as they are ready to speak. And we certainly hope to have some time at the end of today's presentations for comments and questions from all of you who are in our audience today. And thanks to all of you for coming and joining us. And I hope that you'll have things to add to the discussion. So our first speaker today is Sarah Davis. And Sarah is the University Archivist for the University of Wyoming. She works at the American Heritage Center. As University Archivist, Sarah supervises the University Archives and Records Management Program, which includes soliciting, identifying, and facilitating transfer of digital and analog records. Her prior professional archives experience includes working as a digital archivist / digital project manager for the National Association of Olmsted Parks in collaboration with the National Park Service's Frederick Law Olmsted National Historic Site, creating physical and digital exhibits for the University of Massachusetts Boston campus, and processing collections for the Appalachian Mountain Club. She has earned the Society of American Archivists Digital Archives Specialist Certificate. She actually serves, or is the incoming chair, I believe, of the committee that works on that curriculum. And she has an MSLS with an archives management concentration from Simmons College. And I will add that she also serves very well on our Wyoming SHRAB, State Historic Records Advisory Board. So I will turn it over to Sarah to start our first presentation.
Thank you, Kathy, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Sarah Davis, and I am the University Archivist for the University of Wyoming at the American Heritage Center. My presentation today is about collecting the past for the future, the University of Wyoming American Heritage Center's COVID-19 collection project. The University of Wyoming was established in 1886, before Wyoming even became a state, and it is the only 4-year university in the entire state to this day. The American Heritage Center, and formerly known as the AHC, is a standalone department within the university, is totally separate from the library, and reports to the VP of Academic Affairs. The AHC is probably one of the largest non-governmental archives in the nation. It holds rare books, a very large manuscript collection, and it serves as the university archives. The AHC has about 20 full-time employees and about equally as many part-time employees. So where it all began, the seed of the AHC's COVID-19 collection project began around January or February of 2020, when the news media outlets started to have reports about coronavirus. During spring break of March 2020, the university took its first steps into mitigating the spread of coronavirus. The university extended spring break for an additional week to give instructors time to move all their course content online. Students were advised not to return to campus, but only to pick up their their belongings, and all classes were to be held online for the remainder of the semester. All non-essential employees were asked to work remotely. This included the AHC, so we quickly found some projects for our part-time and full-time employees to work on away from the office until the campus figured out a plan to move forward. Eventually, the university had decided to allow the work-study students to be paid without returning to the university, which was great, but it also impacted the personnel at the AHC as well as many campus units. As time progressed and new data and tools became available, the university employees and students were allowed to come back to campus, but with some precautions. Employees were required to take COVID tests once a week, and students were required to take COVID tests twice a week, and all of us had to wear masks on campus. With all these dramatic changes and the large impact on University, Wyoming, the nation, and globally, my colleagues at the HC and I decided it was a historical moment in time that needed to be documented, and people would like to study it into the future. But with the ruralness of Wyoming and the relatively limited media documentation, the HC decided that it needed to be proactive to be able to capture what it was like to live through this pandemic at this time in this place. But there were a lot of things to consider, such as resources available to work on the project. What should we include in the collection? Who would want to use the collection? What types of materials would document the historic time? What types of materials would be possible to preserve? And if there was any institution collecting these stories. So resources, major impact on embarking on this COVID-19 collection project. As mentioned before, the AHC doesn't have very many personnel, considering the size of the collections in the institution. As mentioned previously, many of the work-study students did not return after spring break, limiting it even more. And some of our other part-time employees are limited to the types of projects that they can work on. This essentially meant that the full-time personnel would have to facilitate and add on another project. The project team included the digital archivist, Rachel Gademeyer, the Simpson and Outreach archivist, Leslie Wagner, and myself, the university archivist. I also enlisted the help of two of my interns for a short period of time to conduct oral histories with their classmates and also identify records to add to the archival collection. Additionally, the AHC's marketing committee assisted us with a few social media posts and special projects. With working primarily remotely in the ever-changing university protocols and policies for management of the pandemic, the HC team was consistently evolving our workflows, but key communication via email and via video conferencing became imperative. When we met in person, we were careful to abide by social distancing and quarantine recommendations. The other big resource, as you guessed it, was storage. If we were planning to start a special collecting project, we had to consider our limitations in terms of electronic and physical storage, which brought up even more concerns about what types of electronic records we can keep, what formats we would accept, and how much storage space we currently had. As you probably know, video formats tend to be very large in size compared to PDFs. If we take in physical materials, are we collecting textiles, large posters, and photographic prints? All of these materials require different types of preservation activities to ensure longevity. So once we identified the resources needed for successful implementation of this project, we needed to define who our main donors were going to be. What group is our main interest in collecting? As we were part of the University of Wyoming and the only archives for the university, we knew right away that the University of Wyoming and its students, faculty, staff, and alumni were our main focus. Secondly, with a large portion of Laramie being associated with the university and us being part of the community, we felt it was imperative to include our city, Laramie, as the main focus. And with UW's breadth and Wyoming's vastness, our third priority was to capture the stories across the state. With UW being the only four-year university in the entire state, many of our patrons and most interested audience would be this community, our fellow Wyomingites. When we defined our donors and audience, we thought about ways in which our community communicates. Some people feel that images make more of an impact than words, while others feel that poetry evokes more emotion than statistics. We wanted people to contribute to this project in any way that they felt most comfortable sharing their stories. The AHC was open to creative contributions to express the way that the pandemic was impacting them. Knowing this and the possibilities of what might be submitted, it was necessary to continue to consider our resources and reach out to our peer institutions across the state to find out if they were collecting anything. We reached out first to the Wyoming State Archives and the Wyoming State Museum to determine if they were planning to collect stories on this historic time. From there, we formed a group and invited members across the state to join in our monthly meetings. Generally speaking, the Wyoming State Museum was committed to collecting more artifacts and ephemeral items, whereas the Wyoming State Archives planned to focus on capturing records of the state government and more of the community stories. The AHC, as mentioned before, was targeting the audience of the university and its community, including students, faculty, staff, students, alumni, and Laramie. In this larger Wyoming network, we aimed to involve the smaller institutions and historical societies in documenting their own communities and the impact on their everyday lives. Now that the AHC team had a better understanding of this project and our partners, we were able to create some documentation to start this project. First, we created a special form for people to donate to this collection, which allowed participants to indicate whether they wanted to be anonymous and restrict these materials for a set amount of time. The AHC then created a website that discussed our project, what we hope to collect, and it included all the forms and facts for the project. We also created a video that was posted to the website that talked more about the project. We also recognized that some participants would prefer more structure to what to donate, so we created a survey that people can participate in and be anonymous with their submissions. To get the word out, initially, we wrote and posted a few posts to our AHC blog and created social media posts to our subscribed platforms. We even got airtime on Wyoming Public Media radio to advertise this project. Additionally, my colleagues and I sent out emails to instructors across campus about potential projects to add to the course curriculum to aid in collecting creative contributions to the COVID-19 collection project. But as time went by, we started to realize we were getting less of the community voices. So we conducted oral history with some of our Laramie community members. And on the larger scale for our outreach, we worked with our new partners, the Wyoming COVID-19 Collecting Group, primarily the AHC, the Wyoming State Archives, and the Wyoming State Museum, to put together a few press releases to be distributed at periodic times across the state to press agencies, the Cultural Heritage Institution listservs, and other related institutions about the project. In return, we were interviewed for newspaper stories, and actually Kathy, Marcus, and I were interviewed by a local television station to discuss our project. These efforts helped people in making donations to our project and get the word out. When donations started to come in, thankfully, the Wyoming COVID-19 Collecting Group worked together to create a Google site to share the stories given. We received photographs, artwork, poetry, homemade masks, audio recordings, and much, much more. This website lets people peek into the life within the community, relate to what other people are experiencing, and potentially add their own stories of Wyoming in different formats of documentation. So where are we now? The AHC is still collecting materials, and we are still meeting with the COVID-19 Wyoming group. We recognize that this pandemic is evolving and that people go through ebbs and flows about how they feel about this time period. With the university and other schools coming back in full force in the fall, as well as many other institutions and programs, we are planning to pick up on some of our outreach efforts. Some projects include reaching out to our university's Trustees Education Initiative team, Curtis Biggs and Colby Gold, to distribute to K-12 schools in Wyoming lesson plans that focus on collecting stories of our younger community members. We are also planning to do follow-up interviews, oral history interviews with Laramie community members to learn about the changes over the year. So thank you today for your time. Feel free to email me and check out our AHC website and the Wyoming COVID-19 collecting website for more information.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I was part of that, and it was really interesting to listen to it. And I hope that people do go and visit the website. We'd love feedback on what things are like, what you're getting, what are different. And we invite creative stealing, don't we, Sarah? Okay, so our next two speakers are from the Arkansas. Where do I live? The Arkansas State Archives. Abby DeVille is the digital archivist for the Arkansas State Archives. Prior to joining the State Archives in 2019, DeVille graduated from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette with an MA degree in public history and has worked in public libraries. While at the State Archives, she's been creating metadata, editing uploads, and adding new materials to the Arkansas Digital Archives. She digitized materials from the collections and made them available online using both bpress and Preservica platforms. Being a digital archivist, she says, allows her to connect people with their history almost every day. And as you can see from the screen, this is going to be a joint presentation. So she is joined by her colleague. Oh, sorry. No,
you're fine.
Yes?
You're good.
Okay.
My chair squeaked.
Okay, sorry about that. She is joined by her colleague, Darren Bell. Darren is an archival assistant in the microphotography section of the Arkansas State Archives, preserving newspapers and similar publications from across the state through the mature but not obsolete practice of microfilming. Go microfilming. He has a master's in history from Southeast Missouri State, where he was a graduate assistant in the special collections and archives, and later employed as a member of the staff working with education and outreach efforts. Darren joined the Arkansas State Archives team in 2014. In his free time, he enjoys wandering through historic urban built environments, traveling Arkansas, exploring its diverse cultures, enjoying a good baseball game, and paying keen interest to the many teams associated with the Arkansas Razorbacks. And I will just say that David Ware from the State Archives promised me that your approach would be about documenting the COVIDian age in Arkansas. So I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Hi. So my name is Darren Bell. I'm going to start off. I'm going to start off some introduction, with some introductory material. Abby will join about more of the digital side, and then I'll come back talking about what we're doing with microphotography and our newspapers in the state of Arkansas. Some quick background that might be key to understanding what we're doing. We are the official state archive of Arkansas. We were established in 1905 by the Arkansas General Assembly as the Arkansas History Commission. We changed our name in 2016 to the Arkansas State Archives. And part of our mission is to collect material bearing on the history of Arkansas to encourage historical work and research by the public. So it's not just about state records with the Arkansas State Archives. We have the largest collection of Arkansas produced publications. As of 2019, we had over 22,000 rolls of microfilm, of newspaper microfilm. And as of 2021, we are currently collecting 81 newspapers from across the state and 33 other smaller publications, periodicals, religious newsletters, that sort of thing, for microfilm preservation. So we are taking this on two fronts. On one front, we are working with Preservica, and their hashtag Our COVID-19 Story initiative has 250 gigabytes of free storage for collecting COVID-19 materials. And so we're taking advantage of that. We're saving content from state and local government websites, and as well as the state archives and our larger umbrella agency, the Department of Parks, Heritage, and Tourism. We also saved weekly COVID updates. First started off as daily, but then as the pandemic wore on, transitioned into weekly COVID updates by our governor. And we added that to Preservica. And then we created an index of newspaper articles or articles from various publications to take advantage of our journalism strength here in the state. And I think Abby is going to talk about our Preservica efforts. Yeah.
So my name's Abby DeVille, and I'm the digital archivist here at Arkansas State Archives. Starting COVID in around March 2020 is whenever we went into lockdown. Me and the other digitization people watched lots of training videos to even just be aware of what Preservica was and what they were doing. We tried to guess for future problems or potential uses after COVID, how we can continue this. We wanted to ingest valuable institutional content and add metadata to make it as useful as possible and as searchable as possible. Develop policies and institutional metadata standards based on test collections. With COVID, it's new. There's not standards for this, so we were trying our best practices, and hopefully it'll last.
Yep.
Post-COVID. Oh, I didn't realize I had the mouse. So we focused, being the state archives, on the state and local government websites. We crawled a few of them and just made sure to get links that we thought would be usable. We did run into some of our government websites not working as well to be captured as others. For example, the Department of Health interactive maps didn't capture very well. I mean, that's our problem for capturing, not theirs for putting it out there. The determined documentation wasn't changed very quickly, and quarterly manual crawls would suffice, meaning that once a day or daily crawls was not at all necessary, especially whenever the governor started doing weekly press conferences instead of daily press conferences. And then we decided that COVID-19 case studies were well represented within his weekly media updates, so we didn't think we need to go past that. Oh, I need a mouse thing. So this was kind of our plan of how we were going to, what we were going to use and how we were going to use it. Our newsletters beforehand were not online. That was something we kind of used in spare time to give people work that didn't necessarily have at-home work. Yeah, and then capture just website migration. We crawled websites, capturing those, making sure everything was there. Oh. I'm having technical difficulties with the mouse. There we go. This is kind of the same thing. We made sure that everything, whenever it was saved in a way that it could be accessed in many different ways later. So PDFs being the best for that. Once it's on Preservica, we made sure that it was live through universal access so anyone could get it. There was no wait period because it was stuff that was already published immediately. As the bottom point says, we haven't completed all of the metadata yet. It's being compiled right now. Having new stuff daily and weekly on top of the stuff that you're already doing, obviously, is a task. So this is just an example of what our Preservica from our side looks like. So we decided to do it monthly. And it's just, from what you can see, it's just different websites that we've crawled, whether it be the Chamber of Commerce or the mayor's office. We did a few that were like ceremonial sites that we covered that weren't going to be up anymore later. So we thought that those maybe needed to be documented for later over other things. This is what our website looked like during the pandemic. We're not closed currently to the public, but before we were taking appointments only. Now we're encouraging strongly that people make appointments. It doesn't seem to be happening as much, and there's much more foot traffic in and out the door, which is nice for people working the research room to give them something to do, but also the less people to interact with right now, the better. This was what I was talking about with the commemoration sites. So we went through and crawled them. We got all of some of them had PDFs, some of them had videos or original audio, stuff like that. We went through, and this is a lot of what's on our Preservica. We thought that this was, it helped us practice with Preservica and get our standards. And then moving forward, we can be better about the practices for COVID-related documents. And this is just a screenshot of what it looks like on the user end of our Preservica. So the Black History Commission seminars, that's something that's been happening with the Black History Commission. That's also a part of Arkansas History or Arkansas State Archives. The Civil War, World War I, and Arkansas women's suffrage, those are the ones we use kind of as examples, testing, making standards. And the middle one, that's more of what Darren worked on with grabbing records from our governor and from different government websites. Same thing, this is just a different view. You can see that we have like the logos to help people maybe see better what they're looking for. Same thing, this is just the Civil War one. It's a little further in depth of examples of what you would find within our Preservica sites. And then this is the COVID, the governor videos that Darren collected.
Yes, I helped out and kind of went on a monthly basis. I went through the governor's website, which had its own COVID dedicated informational page, so daily updates, press conferences, that sort of thing. And the videos connected to his YouTube page, where we downloaded the videos from YouTube. We would have some issues with the download process and download software occasionally, but we got every video. It also helped out that the governor's office used transcription software and audio software. So we captured that as well as any kind of visual aids that the governor presented in his updates. He is still doing weekly press conferences on much larger, more broad topics, but his COVID updates officially ended towards the end of May. And now we want to talk about what I've been working on since the shutdown. So we have all this Preservica space, and Dr. David Ware wanted to use our strength of having all these Arkansas newspapers and collecting these newspapers from across the state. So what I did was I went through all the newspapers that we collect and pulled out various articles about COVID. It's not and created an index or a finding aid of what we have on microfilm here or what we will have on microfilm here at the archives. It's non-comprehensive because we don't collect every newspaper in the state. And if I pulled out every article on COVID, it would be gigantic and I'd be still working on it for about 20 years. All in all, I collected over 2,700 articles from 74 publications, representing 52 of the 75 counties in the state. 17 daily newspapers represented 88% of the content. The largest daily in our state, the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, which represents itself as a statewide newspaper, made 43% of that content. 52 weekly publications, which is what I was really hoping to capture the most from to get the more diverse opinions and views of the pandemic from the smaller rural communities, only picked up about 9%, which is a little disappointing. Three semi-weekly publications represented about 2%. Those are newspapers that publish twice a week and not necessarily larger communities in the rural smaller communities, but just the frequency that they decided to publish. And then we have 2 monthly publications. One of those monthly publications is the alternative publication that publishes statewide and produces various opinions on a lot of topics. So we thought having the Arkansas Times was important to keep. No articles from Newswire services were included. We wanted to keep this as Arkansas-centric as possible, and limited syndicated content to journalists and columnists in the state. Limited number of press releases. That makes up a lot of our smaller rural weekly papers, but we wanted to, have a name attached to a lot of our content. And then we did not include any reader-submitted letters. That is a decision that was made because, like many of the articles that I would find in the publications, the topic and the content repeat themselves, but in various different ways. All right, let me squeeze this through here. To help sort this out and kind of help create a searchable subject-based index, I put about 36 topical descriptors to kind of classify each article, what it was about. And these are the various topics I've created to kind of sort everything out. For example, one weird one is food processing. Arkansas is home to Tyson Foods, so we have a lot of chicken farms, meat processing, turkey. Butterball has a large operations here in the state, so that's one of the weird ones, one of the odd categories I had to create. And then I also did it to create some statistical notes. What are the results? Because again, we collected from January of 2020 through May. And we did that because the governor's mandate ended, the governor's emergency declaration ended in April. Vaccines were available and schools end in May. So we felt as if that would be a good cutoff point to kind of say, we survived the school year, we have a vaccine. Let's see how everyone's coping with that. So out of that time period, I collected 327 op-ed columns, and it was the most frequent descriptor for weekly and semi-weekly publications. which I think is good because we have opinions on a lot of topics related to the pandemic. And it's not just get the vaccine, don't get the vaccine. You know, the pandemic is it's, you know, wash your hands, wear a mask. It's about other topics: housing, voting, education, a variety of topics. The most among our monthly publications, we had three articles related to. The most frequent descriptor were 3 articles related to arts and 3 articles related to a large, broad, catch-all category I've kind of termed community for the time being. The Arkansas Democrat Gazette, its largest descriptor, were 237 articles related to state health updates, and our other dailies, not including the Democrat Gazette, had 137 articles related to their local governments. And other popular topics in all publications were business and our K through 12 education. How are we going to run how are we going to keep jobs and keep our businesses open with less restrictions? And how are we going to educate our children? And that was what it kind of broke down to be. And so that's kind of our quick presentation right there.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate that. And it's interesting to know on all of our behalfs, some of the projects that we were able to accomplish in what seemed like a downtime, but I think has ended up being pretty productive for many of us. Our final speaker will be Rachel Onoff from the Vermont Historical Records Program, where she is the director. She's based at the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration, and her past jobs include serving as roving archivist for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the director of archives at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. She's also taught as an adjunct at Simmons University School of Library and Information Science and worked as an independent consultant for many years. She has an MILS from the University of Michigan and a master's degree in history from the University of Virginia. And Rachel had mentioned earlier that she was going to be talking about the perspective of an agency that had to rely on volunteers to collect data and the problems and challenges that that's posed. So take it away, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Kathy, and good afternoon, everyone. I think it's probably afternoon for all attending at this point. I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about what we've been doing, our modest efforts at, as Kathy said, it's citizen-led documentation of the pandemic. And I want to thank my colleague at the VHRP, Sally Blanchard O'Brien, for her help putting together this presentation. As Kathy noted at the top of the hour, this is something that all of our professional organizations are discussing, and Sally has indeed done a version of this for the Society of American Archivists Conference, which is kicking off what's kind of been on a slow start, but panels and sessions will be officially opening up next week, I think. So a little bit of context, because of course we're archivists, we love this. Let you know, if you haven't heard about the VHRP previously, what we are and what we're about. We are a program of our State Historical Records Advisory Board, VRAB, and really kind of got its start in their desire to do more for historical records repositories around the state, and them all being very limited in their capacity and what they were able to do as individuals or as a board. So in combination with Tanya Marshall, our fantastic state archivist, came up with a plan to propose to an HPRC through one of the state board programming grants that we develop this historical records program. And Tanya initially got the program going in May of 2017 by persuading our Secretary of State, Secretary Kondos, to come up with some seed money to start a part-time temporary position. And that person then, that was me, got to write a grant to an HPRC, and then through that have built the program first becoming a full-time position, and as of in the last year, adding Sally. So now we're full-time, 2 full-time folks doing the work. So we're based at the State Archives, although as you can probably tell, I'm not at the State Archives. I am in the office typically 1 day a week, and Sally a couple days a week, and otherwise working remotely or out in the field. We do a lot of technical assistance and are back to doing site visits and doing on-site assessments, offering advice, doing workshops and trainings. And the other part of our work, and what I'm really turning toward and letting Sally focus more on the technical assistance, is connecting with other organizations and bringing the pieces together to try to build statewide capacity, whether that's through joint grant projects. We have a couple planning grants out with Vermont Historical Society and the Department of Libraries, or working to build the capacity of those institutions that want to collaborate but kind of need someone to help glue everything together and bring people together, and just to help folks in Vermont who tend to be a little bit siloed in our towns, and make sure that the people are aware of what other people are doing and finding opportunities to connect and work together as a group. So in terms of our citizen-led engagement projects and documenting COVID, we weren't the first to jump by any means within the state of Vermont. Vermont Historical Society very quickly put up an Omeka instance. They've been using that already. So they set up a site inviting people to submit materials, and they have, at this point, I just checked, they have a little over 500 things that have been submitted by the citizens of Vermont that they thought reflected COVID and the time of COVID in Vermont. So they were doing that thing. In consultation with Tanya, she felt pretty confident that the records that would document the state response and provide evidence of what had happened at the government level during the pandemic, that would all in time come through. That would come in through our usual channels of scheduling and transfer of records to the state archives and to our largely digital at this point. Those would go directly into our digital repository called VT Retain. So we didn't need to do the government records. VHS had kind of citizen stuff coming in. Another wonderful organization in Vermont, the Vermont Folklife Center, was holding listening circles and having people share and recording their thoughts and feelings about the pandemic. So there were these wonderful things already happening. But what did happen is a couple photographers approached Tanya and asked about whether their work could be preserved at the state archives. So Andy Dubak and Carmen George both reached out to Tanya within a month or so, and it was this kind of perfect storm of, I'd been in conversation with Preservica, which was, Vasara had been using an enterprise cloud solution for our repository for many years. I'd been in communication with them about possible solutions for smaller organizations, the kind I was working with, that were often creating all sorts of digital surrogates of their analog materials, but didn't necessarily have a mechanism for preserving them for the long term. And then Preservica came up with their, as Darren mentioned, our COVID-19 story initiative, where they offered free storage for their existing clients to capture COVID-19 documentation. And it really, excuse me, it really was an opportunity for us. We've been thinking about how to involve people in documentation strategies more proactively. So this was the way we decided we would launch our participatory model for civic engagement initiatives. So Andy worked in black and white and tended to photograph his families outside their houses. And Carmen was more often photographing in color and often took a series of photographs. And she would often range, not, would see people out and about in their neighborhood a little bit. And they both reached out because, well, they were out of work as professional photographers. There was no work for them to be had. So they were casting about, but they were also looking for being people who are capturing things within a frame for a living. They recognize kind of the import and the value of using their craft to document what was going on. And I love that they both initially turned toward their communities and wanting to capture people in response. So they also recognize it's important to collect words. So they both did questionnaires. Andy's was a pretty comprehensive Google Doc form that folks would fill out. So those ended up coming into the archive. Again, this was all very new. I had to develop a workflow and redacted the email addresses, but otherwise was able to maintain the form. And he had developed it in consultation with myself and Tanya. And one of the things it included was the opportunity for the folks filling them out to indicate that they were giving permission for their likeness and for the questionnaire to be preserved forever at the state archives. So we had that built into the document itself. And then Carmen was a little more informal in gathering information from her subjects, but she also often provided a photographer's note, which gave a little bit more insight into at least how she was perceiving what was going on, or gave some details about the day that they had their photo shoot. And Andy he definitely wanted to kind of maintain control over what came in. So he's the one who selected what would be included in the archive, and he picked one portrait for each family. They were all in black and white, as I said. And Carmen gave us access to a site where we could pick and choose what images we thought would be best suited for long-term retention. And I charged Sally with developing. We worked together to develop criteria for how we would choose, or how she would choose. And then she went ahead and did that selection. So she chose about between 3 and 5 for each subject, and tried to keep out visible house numbers and other things that might make it clear where this house was, and tried to kind of be representative of the full session, because Carmen would sometimes have her subjects move around on their property or in the neighborhood, and she chose ones again that were aesthetically pleasing and evocative of the time. So, as I noted, we've been using Preservica at Fasara, had been in conversations with Lori Ashley and others there about what to do about the small guys who couldn't necessarily, spin up a enterprise cloud version of the software. And Preservica was thinking very much along the same lines, and they came up with their starter, which is available for free initially. And depending on how much space you need, you could then buy in. So they did some beta testing over the summer and then again in the fall. And the VHRP was a beta tester in the fall, along with several other Vermont institutions. And we used the COVID-19 collections as our first material to be ingested, and to kind of figure out how the use case of how might we use this program, how's it going to work. And it is and to some extent continues to be slightly labor intensive because the metadata had to be added at the item level. And I'd had enough exposure to the enterprise version to know you could upload a spreadsheet full of metadata that would magically link with all of your digital assets. But this was a little bit more item level than many of us would prefer to work. But it was a good process for us. And hey, everyone, it was in the middle of a pandemic. This was a fine thing to be kind of figuring out how to use and how it might work for us. And I will say that Preservica continues to improve the software and make it possible to do more things in batches or in bulk. So it's been working well. And so we've developed a couple collections that include the photographs, obviously, and the artist statements. And in Andy's case, there's also the Google questionnaires were saved as PDFs and are included in his collection as well. And we did try to, in our modest ways, try to promote the existence of the site. And one of the things that makes it so exciting to me is that it does do long-term digital preservation, and it does it behind the scenes. So it's automating a lot of the processes that need to happen to make sure that files stay authentic and retain their integrity. And it's been working really, really well for us so far. I will say, it was the way we kind of put our toes into how to provide a place for citizens of Vermont who are doing intensive research or creating art in response to a pandemic or some other event, a place where that could be preserved for the long term. And we have additional non-pandemic projects moving forward, connected with a gentleman, retired social studies teacher, who's he presented me with a 1,500-page Word document of all of the information that he could possibly collect related to every school that ever existed or currently exists in the state. So he, bless him, has spent the last few months turning that very difficult Word doc into a spreadsheet, which we're going to then work on providing access to. So there's different ways we're working with it, and sometimes we're using Preservica. One example of that is working with the Vermont Folklife Center. I don't know if you may have seen that we certainly saw a Bernie meme or two with his mittens at the inauguration. So Folklife Center jumped on trying to collect those memes, and Andy got promptly overwhelmed by all of the responses and the people who were sending in their favorite memes or memes they created in response to his call. And I'm working very slowly on getting those then ingested into Preservica as another collection. So that's all been really wonderful. It's been really great. The challenges and why I'm somewhat hesitant to talk about how fantastic it is that the challenge of working on citizen-led documentation is, of course, it's led by citizens. So we cannot make them give us the documentation. And case in point, Andy Dubak, wonderful photographer, great guy. And he started working on documenting the state response by taking photographs of the National Guard, giving out food, setting up spaces for potentially, spillover hospitals, going into University of Vermont's Medical Center and photographing that, demonstrating how businesses had changed. So he started documenting beyond his neighborhood. And frankly, I was more excited about that than about his neighbors. But then he got back to work. So the project has been on a back burner for many, many months. And it's hard to know when that might become something he can focus on again. And I think we're going to have to negotiate like how we might jump in to help, or, you know, he has the last thing he did was to say, hey, well, you can take a look and go ahead and download and ingest any of these images you want, but there's no metadata. Like, I don't know, I can't tell what's what. So I'm loath to do that because I want to be able to provide some description alongside the images. So that's been a challenge, but I think it's kind of, we're in it for the long haul, and we'll continue to offer support to Vermonters who want to try to do a documentation project, and do what we can to help them do that. Happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rachel. We're just about at the top of the hour, but I just wanted to thank everyone for giving us such different ways that we've used our pandemic time to either enhance what we were already doing or start off on new projects. I had been going to ask, were there things that you think that you'll continue now that you started them during the pandemic? And I'm going to defer to Lisa to see if we want to keep going or if we need to end here.
I think we can take time for a couple questions.
Okay. I'm not seeing any in chat. Is there anything from the audience that people would like to ask?
And
Well,
Kathy, while we're waiting for chat to show up, go ahead and ask one of your questions.
Yes, exactly. So I was really struck. I had written down silver lining, but then Rachel, you said perfect storm. And I thought that was kind of a perfect way to put it. We had all this time on our hands that we hadn't been predicting that we were going to have. We were a little limited in what we could and couldn't do. But, you know, you guys are three wonderful examples of taking a potentially bad situation and making it work to your advantage. And I have to say, so did Preservica, coming up with their starter program right when we all had time to play with it. So I don't know if you all have any thoughts about, is there anything that you started doing during the pandemic that you now see that you would like to continue? Or are there things that you had to stop doing during the pandemic that you are thinking, maybe we just don't even need to do that anymore?
Hi, Kathy. I think I have an answer to this question. So we are kind of still closed to the public. We're taking appointments for our reading room. And because nobody can come in and out of the archives, we actually started holding Zoom reference sessions. And so we have like these pods that like an archivist can go into and like show like actual documents to the researcher and have one-on-one appointments with them. So kind of helping researchers, we get researchers from globally. And so it's actually opened up doors, or being able to communicate more with these people and lessen the burden of cost of actually coming to rural Wyoming. And we're going to continue that for quite a long time.
I suspect that's something that the reference staff would have liked to have played with a long time ago, and this gave them the excuse to do it, which is great. Rachel or Abby and Darren, any other thoughts along those lines?
I think we're just, so when the pandemic began, we had had Preservica for some time and had started playing around with a little bit. And this COVID-19 story, hashtag COVID-19 story, is the first chance we really got to digest and use Preservica to its fullest abilities. Right before the pandemic as well, we acquired another large collection that we're working with Preservica as well, but we're still going to continue to ingest as much of this COVID material as possible to Preservica. The index is going to, I have it in an Excel file and in a Word doc. So we'll probably find some way to make the Excel file searchable. and allow people to filter for content, but also keep that paper copy in chronological order, so date by date you know what happened in the pandemic for stories or events.
Great.
I would just quickly add, I think the biggest change in the culture is going to be much more judicious commitments to in-person meetings. I mean, I used to think nothing of spending a day driving back and forth for a 2-hour meeting.
Mhm.
I just think that's not going to happen. It's so much more efficient and productive. And we've all gotten so much more accustomed and for the most part, better at the virtual meetings. I think we all recognize their value because of all the people who otherwise might not be able to attend too, right? That can then participate, assuming that they can get a reasonable internet connection, which is not necessarily an assumption you can make probably in any of our states.
Right. Yeah, I think that the trick over the next 5 years, say, is going to be what a hybrid workplace is going to look like. I mean, I'm assuming that in most cases, we're not all going to come back 100%. We're all not going to all start meeting in person 100%. What are we going to keep? There are times, obviously, when you want to meet in person, when it really enhances the experience. But how often and what circumstances will that take place? It'd be really fascinating to see it all play out. Rachel, when I was listening to your presentation, I was just sitting here kind of writing down jealous, jealous, jealous. I mean, that's that's a wonderful, I might have missed something. Did you solicit that, or did those people come to you with those projects?
They approached us.
That's what I thought, yeah. Well, Sarah, you had
But-
something similar, didn't you? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's true. We actually had like a local photographer who was taking pictures of people in Laramie and their experiences in with COVID. I think they actually started with creating a Facebook page, and people there was like a picture of the people in the community, and then like a little blurb of what they felt it was to live during this time. And we've been collecting that as time goes on.
And Rachel, I cut you off. You were going to say something more about how it came to you.
Well, only just that the intent is, I know there's other artists who've been in other media too, not necessarily photography, who've been responding to the pandemic here in Vermont. And I would love to be able to reach out to them about their work as well. But that's where my own capacity is maxed out. And that's always on the tomorrow list.
Right.
So.
And I'll just add one other thing, and this dovetails with what Sarah was talking about, and also gives one non-Preservica plug. And that is that we ended up using Google Sites for our website, which turned out to be, the state of Wyoming is all Google all the time. So that was the platform that was most logical for us to use. It was also free, which fit our budget. But one of the things that was nice was that we were able to offer a remote internship to an archival grad student to help us pull that together. And I really had not given a thought to remote internships and what we could provide in that way. And I think that's something that we'll probably try and continue, is to offer those and think about other ways that people could use both content or creating things on different platforms that they can do from home. And Sarah, I think you worked most closely with Emily, our intern, while she was developing that site.
Yeah, I liked that we were able to help with internships, and we actually had to do, like I mentioned, figure out projects where a lot of people can do a lot of things online. Actually, a lot of our collections were in PDF format instead of actually encoded, and so that was part of our main project. That was something I thought was amazing. We finally got to encode some of our findings. So
yeah, same with us. That thing that you think is never going to happen, finally there's all this time and you get to do it. And I think that probably describes what you and what Abby and Darren were working on as well. Do you feel like that's a project that you would have been able to get to had the pandemic not happened?
So the pandemic allowed for a lot of our staff to do a lot of hands-on translation, metadata. We were beginning to transition from transition to bpress. So a lot of our documents within our larger collection, we decided to digitize and put on to make available on bpress. So there were a lot of staff members doing some doing some what am I?
Metadata?
They're doing a lot of metadata, and that took up a lot of the pandemic time.
Right.
And our staff, for the most part, really didn't all come back until last May. So there's a lot of metadata transcribing going on between March of last year and May of this year to get it all on bpress.
Excellent. Well, thank you to all of you for your comments today and answers to questions. And I would just say that I think that as archivists, we're a really, agile is a word that nobody wants to hear again in their whole life, but we made this work for ourselves. And I think that we should all give ourselves pats on the back. And I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa to finish off the webinar.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you to all of our presenters for wonderful presentations and lots of thought-provoking concepts. So just in closing, I just want to remind you, we hope you enjoyed today's webinar, but look forward. The last Thursday of every month is usually some sort of webinar activity for us. But before we get to that, August is CoSA's work session and business meeting month. So those are noted on the schedule. So we hope you'll check out the links for those and sign up. And then August 26th will be our CoSA NARA webinar, and they'll be on the electronic records projects in both Oregon and at NARA. Always stay in touch, and there's lots of ways to do it, and we hope you will. Reach out to us. And of course, none of this is possible for us without the support of our sponsors and funders. So we hope that if you reach out, you let them know that you appreciate their support of what CoSA does. And finally, we hope, just an aside, WebEx just changed their format. We think you may be getting an evaluation. We hope so. If you do, please take a moment and fill it out. It really does help our education committee as they move forward in trying to find new programs. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our presenters. Kathy, thank you for our moderator. And we hope we'll see you at the next CoSA event. So you guys take care until then. Have a great day. Bye.